Raphael, a titan of the Italian Renaissance, an artistic genius with elegant compositions that have permanently influenced Western art. And of course you must recognize such works such as the School of Athens, within which Raphael embodies these Renaissance principles of harmony, perspective, and intellectual magnificence, effortlessly merging technical proficiency with tranquil beauty. But his life was much more than just painting. He was also an accomplished architect, and he contributed to the construction of many notable structures, including even sections of St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. Thus his creative nature and engagements with contemporaries such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo enhanced his work, establishing him as a pivotal figure in the cultural renaissance of his era, and a legacy that lives on in his famous work. And a legacy that lives on in 2024 YouTube, where people like me make videos about him, and people like you come to watch them. If you're still listening, I hope the introduction was sufficient. But if you are, it's good to see you here again, or if you're a newcomer, it's good to meet you. As always, do you want to support the channel? You only need to click 2 buttons. It's the like and subscribe, and that's a pretty good deal for what you get out of it. Now, with that being said, I won't pressure you, but I will advise you to get nice and relaxed, because right now we begin the life of Raphael. And so we begin in Urbino, a pretty small but significant city in central Italy's March region, especially significant for art culture. Now, who was his father? It was one Giovanni Santi, and he served as the court painter to the Duke. So definitely coming from a background of artists, where painting runs in the blood. Now the court's esteemed reputation was established by one Federico de Montefeltro, a highly successful man who was appointed Duke of Urbino by Pope Sixtus IV himself. Now, this is because Urbino was part of the Papal States at the time. Now, Federico unfortunately passed away the year before Raphael was born. But although Federico's court emphasized literature over art, Giovanni Santi, the father of Raphael, was both a painter and a poet, and he was very good at both of them. In fact, he wrote a rhymed chronicle of Federico's life, and was involved in creating texts and decorations for the masque-like court entertainments, and there was certainly no shortage of them. Now his poem dedicated to Federico reveals this keen awareness of most of the advanced North Italian painters and early Netherlandish artists. In Urbino's intimate court setting, Giovanni was likely more integrated into the ruling family's inner circle than most court painters would have been at the time, and it certainly helps to have friends in high places. Now, Federico was succeeded by his son, Guidovaldo, who married Elisabetta Gonzaga, the daughter of the ruler of Mantua, a court which was renowned for its excellence in music and the visual arts among the smaller Italian states. And under their leadership, Urbino continued to be a center of this literary culture, and it was getting quite well known for it. Now, growing up in this kind of environment, you can certainly see what kind of effect it would have on a boy, especially one who had artistic sensibilities, and had certainly endowed Raphael with the excellent manners and social skills, as highlighted by his biographer Vasari. I'll get to a little bit of that later. Well, shortly after this period, Urbino's court life became the model for the virtues of the Italian humanist court, as depicted by Castiglione's classic work, The Book of the Courtier, which was published first in 1528. Now, Castiglione actually moved to Urbino in 1504, by which time Raphael was no longer based there, but he still did visit frequently, and the two of them had actually met up and became close friends. Raphael also formed strong friendships with other regular visitors to the court, such as Pietro Bibiena, and Pietro Bembo. Now, both of these men, if you don't recognize the names, had actually gained quite a lot of recognition as writers, as was the style at the time, especially in Urbino and that part of the Papal States, but later they actually became cardinals, and when Raphael was in Rome, they were both there. Once again, helps to have friends in high places, especially in the papacy. Now, throughout his life, Raphael moved effortlessly within this setting of the high society of 16th century Italy, a trait that contributed to the perception that his career advanced with ease. Now, whether this be a slander from people who were just a little bit jealous, that remains to be seen. But either way, you get to where you need to go, however you can get there. Don't tell me you wouldn't do it. However, he did not receive a complete humanistic education that one might expect from someone who would come from these kinds of means and reputation, especially when it comes to Latin. Now, Latin was, at that time, something that you would really want to study. It was the language of God, right? All the Bibles were written in that, and being in Italy, you wanted to understand those old texts. So that would be the main topic that you would really pour a lot of your time into. But of course, not everybody was interested. Not everybody had the opportunity. Now, things weren't all fun and games growing up for Raphael. In fact, at only 8 years old, this is in the year 1491, his mother passed away. Now, regardless of the time period, regardless of it being 15th century, it's still a bit of an impact, especially on someone so young. And it didn't help either that 3 years later, August 1st, 1494, his father also passed away. Well, he had passed away after remarrying. And this, it effectively left Raphael as an orphan at the age of 11 years old. In fact, his only legal guardian became his paternal uncle, Bartolomeo, who was a priest who later engaged in legal disputes with Raphael's stepmother. Now, the young artist likely lived with his stepmother when he wasn't apprenticed to a master. According to Vasari, his biographer, Raphael had already shown talent at this time and was indeed a great help to his father. A self-portrait from his teenage years demonstrates this early aptitude, far beyond someone for his age. It appears that from a very young age indeed that Raphael had assisted in managing his father's workshop, probably alongside his stepmother. In Urbino, he encountered the works of Paolo Uccello, the former court painter who died in 1475, and Luca Signorelli, who lived in nearby Città del Castello until 1498. Now, Vasari does mention that Raphael's father apprenticed him to the Umbrian master Pietro Perugino, despite his mother's objections. Well, the only evidence for this apprenticeship comes from Vasari, and only one other source, and it has been contested, since starting an apprenticeship at 8 years old, it's a little bit young don't you think? Now, another theory suggests that the young Raphael received some training from Timoteo Viti, who became the court painter in Urbino in 1495. In fact, most modern historians would agree, at least at the time of this video, that Raphael worked as an assistant to Perugino around 1500. The influence of Perugino on Raphael's early work is extremely obvious. It has been noted by one modern observer, the name of Wolflin, that likely no other prodigious pupil has assimilated as extensively his master's instruction as Raphael did. Now, Vasari had claimed that it was impossible to distinguish between their work during this period. That's how much he was taking on the style. So it's not only in terms of theory, it's practice, learning everything from the master. Well, however, many contemporary art historians believe that they can identify Raphael's contributions in specific sections of Perugino's paintings, or those from his workshop. Don't ask me why. I don't know how they could tell that apart. I'm not an art expert, but maybe you are. If you know, tell me in the comments. Now, beyond these stylistic similarities, their techniques are also comparable. For example, they both apply the paint very thickly, really smashing it onto the canvas, and they use an oil varnish medium in shadows for this darker sort of contexts and colors, especially in clothing, and applying it very lightly on the flesh areas. There's also a high resin content in their varnish, which often causes this kind of cracking in paintings, and I'm sure you've seen this before. If you've looked at any paintings within art galleries very close up, you will see these kinds of cracks and imperfections. That's not due to any poor handling, it's just the ravages of time. Well, Perugino's workshop operated in both Perugia and Florence, possibly maintaining two permanent locations. Well, in December 1500, Raphael is already described as a master, indicating that he had indeed completed his training. So, Raphael's first recorded work was the Baronci altarpiece at the Church of St. Nicholas in Tolentino in Città di Castello, which is a town kind of between Perugia and Urbino. Now, there was an Evangelista da Pientimaletto, who had previously worked for Raphael's father, was also commissioned for the panel. It was ordered in 1500 and completed the following year, but only a few fragments and a preparatory drawing survive today, unfortunately, so we're left with a bit of a mystery as to how the completed work would have looked like. In the following years, Raphael produced more works for several churches, including the Mond Crucifixion around 1503, the Brera Wedding of the Virgin, 1504, and the actual altarpiece for Perugia. Now, it is likely as well that he visited Florence during this time. There are substantial works, some executed in fresco, where Raphael skillfully arranges his compositions in the rather static style of Perugino. During this period, he created numerous small and exquisite cabinet paintings, possibly intended for the connoisseurs of the Urbino court, such as the Three Graces of St. Michael, and began producing Madonnas and portraits. In 1502, he travelled to Siena at the invitation of Pinturicchio, another pupil of Perugino who was being a friend of Raphael and recognized him as an exceptional draftsman. He was there to assist him with a few paintings and likely the designs for a series of frescoes in the Piccolomini library within the Siena Cathedral. So a decent job. That's not bad, especially when you can buddy up with a friend and do that sort of stuff. I imagine it would be good fun. Well, clearly he's in high demand, even in this early stage of his career. being called out to neighbouring cities, neighbouring towns, all that sort of thing. It's not often you get that for a young guy. And so I suppose this kind of led him to leading this nomadic-like existence, working in various locations across northern Italy, wherever somebody would call him to go. But he did spend a pretty significant time in Florence, probably starting around 1504, although there is a traditional designation of a Florentine period from 1504 to 1508. He may not have lived there continuously during those years, though. We're not quite sure of it yet. Now, he might have needed to travel to the city for supplies, however, or other practical reasons, but permanent roots, that's debatable. Well, a letter of recommendation for Raphael, dated October 1504, from the mother of the future Duke of Urbino, states, "The bearer of this letter is Raphael, painter of Urbino, who, possessing exceptional talent in his craft, has resolved to spend some time in Florence for this purpose of study." It continues, "Due to his father's commendable character, and my strong attachment to him, coupled with the son's sensibility and good manners, I hold him in high regard." Well, that's a pretty good reference, isn't it? Well, Raphael, just like Perugino and many others, was combining these Florentine influences alongside developing his own style. Of course, the Renaissance, everybody wanted to develop their own style. That was the point of the Renaissance. To be born again. That's what it means, the rebirth. Now, Fra Bartolomeo, whom Vasari identifies as a good friend of Raphael, may have had an impact on the newly gigantic figures in the Perugia frescoes, which date back to 1505. Of course, Leonardo da Vinci, I'm no doubt you're familiar with, who actually lived in the city again from 1500 to 1506, was the most influential figure during his time. Raphael's figures take on more complex and dynamic positions, while he mostly paints peaceful scenes. But, well, you gotta make money somehow. And he did do quite a few of these sketchy drawings of naked men fighting each other, which was apparently very popular at the time in Florence. I suppose private commissions. Now, in another drawing, there is a young woman depicted with an air reminiscent of Raphael, despite using the same three-quarter length pyramidal composition as the recently completed Mona Lisa. The pyramidal Holy Family, an innovative compositional choice by Leonardo, was represented in a series of works that rank among his most famous easel paintings. This contrapposto, as they call it, position for St. Catherine of Alexander was borrowed from an illustration by Raphael in the royal collection that shows Leonardo's long-lost Leda and the Swan. Well, to make his flesh depictions more nuanced, he used the understandings of Leonardo's techniques, this sfumato technique they called it, and works on the interaction of gazers among these groups, which are far less cryptic than Leonardo's. The delicate luminosity that is Perugino's signature is still there in his works. Very hard to shake these old habits. Well, Michelangelo, I'm sure you know that name. I've done a video on him too. He was also in Rome at the same time as Raphael. And actually, he developed quite a dislike for him. In fact, he already had a dislike for, or even a pre-existing hatred for Leonardo. But in terms of Raphael, he accused Raphael of directly plotting against him. Sounds like a little bit of jealousy, if you ask me. Perhaps there are certain elements of Raphael's work that could have arguably been derivative of Michelangelo's style, but, well, it's all debatable, isn't it? Now, either way, Raphael spent the rest of his life in Rome after relocating there in 1508. Donato Bramante, the architect constructing St. Peter's Basilica at the time, who was actually a different relative of Raphael and also hailed from the area around Urbino, may have been asked by the new Pope, Julius II, to extend an invitation to him. Now, unlike Michelangelo, who stayed in Rome for months after his first summons, Julius immediately commissioned Raphael to fresco the Vatican Palace, which was to serve as the private library of the Pope. He had only ever made one altarpiece in Florence proper before this one, so it was both bigger and more important than really anything he had done before. It was a very big deal, a big contract. Don't mess it up. Well, in different rooms there were plethoras of artists and their teams all hard at work, with many of them reworking pieces that had been commissioned by Alexander VI, Julius's hated predecessor, whose contributions and insignia he was determined to remove from the palace. The Sistine Chapel ceiling was to be painted by Michelangelo, who had already been commissioned to do the task. Well, the famous stanze, or Raphael rooms, now called the Stanza della Segnatura because it was used by Vasari, had a profound impact on Roman art, and is generally thought of as Raphael's greatest work. And it includes, of course, the School of Athens, which is probably the most well-known, recognizable work of his, the Parnassus, and the Disputa. Later on, Raphael was given more painting space, forcing artists like Perugino and Signorelli out of their studios. Now, Raphael clearly took clues from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling while painting the room. According to Vasari, Bramante secretly let him into the chapel to take a little bit of a look at what was going on. By 1511, Raphael had completed the first section of the work, and for the next decades, artists in Italy were preoccupied with how to respond to Michelangelo's enormous influence. Raphael, who had previously shown that he could incorporate influences into his own style, accomplished the task more skillfully than any other artist, with clear influences from the Sistine Chapel, Sibylls, and Ignudi. Michelangelo's self-portrait as Heraclitus in the School of Athens certainly stands out. But while Raphael's signature style developed, other figures in that and the following paintings in the chamber show the same or comparable influences. Years after Raphael's death, Michelangelo bemoaned in a letter that everything he knew about art he acquired from me. But other remarks show more charitable feelings. Either way, Michelangelo seems to have been directly accusing Raphael of copying everything he did. Direct plagiarism. Well, there is a point where it crosses a certain line. But it's not like he was just photocopying the Sistine Chapel ceiling. He was still a good painter. I suppose it opens up a conversation of, can somebody own a style of art? That is an interesting conversation to have, isn't it? And where do we draw a line between influence and direct plagiarism? It's hard to tell. If there is a line, it's a bit of a blurry one. Well, either way, from the very beginning, these huge, complex compositions have been held in high esteem as the great style of the High Renaissance and classic art of the Western world, at least after the 16th century. Well, carefully planned compositions exude this word sprezzatura, a word in which his friend Castiglione invented to describe a certain nonchalance that conceals all artistry and renders whatever one articulates or performed as uncontrived or effortless. Think of this Chinese concept of wu wei, doing without trying. Well, after Bramante died in 1514, the rebuilt St. Peter's Basilica was given to Raphael as its architect. Some of his drawings have survived, which is quite fortunate, but most of the work has either been altered or destroyed after he died, because immediately afterwards Michelangelo's design was adopted. Now, Antonio da Sangallo the Younger characterized the final design, which included substantial piers along the nave, as like an alley in a negative posthumous evaluation. His proposals would have made the church cathedral a lot more solemn. Now, there was a good chance that it looked like the temple in the expulsion of Heliodorus from the temple. Perhaps so, but the finished product is quite a bit different. Now, he designed a plethora of additional buildings, and for a short time held the title of Rome's foremost architect, catering to a very exclusive group of people connected directly to the upper circles of the papacy. The city of Rome was reorganized by Julius, you see, the Pope, who added many new streets and wanted them adorned with these magnificent buildings, somewhat of a throwback to its former glory. But always there is this romanticized view of Rome in antiquity that's probably not quite conducive to reality, but glory days always spark the imagination. Well, despite its complete destruction to make way for Bernini's Piazza for St. Peter's, drawings of the courtyard and facade of the Palazzo Branconio dell'Aquila, a notable building for Leo's papal chamberlain Giovanni Battista Branconio, persist. The three-story front was unusually elaborate for its time, with elaborate sculpture on the ground floor and painted panels covering the top two stories. Now, although Raphael did not come up with the main ideas for the Villa Farnesina, he did collaborate with the papal treasurer Agostino Chigi on the design and decoration of the Chigi Chapel, which features quite a few mosaics. Well, originally built for the physician of Pope Leo, the Palazzo Jacopo de Brescia was moved in the 1930s, but even though it was moved, it is still standing today. It was designed to complement a neighboring Bramante house, where Raphael actually lived for a while on a permanent basis. Well, Bramante asked Raphael to assess modern copies of Lacan and his sons around 1510. He was appointed prefect in 1515 and given control over all artifacts found in or within 1 mile of the city. Anyone finding artifacts had to tell Raphael within 3 days, and masons could not remove inscriptions without permission. In a letter he sent to Pope Leo, Raphael suggested ways to save historical sites from destruction and called for an exhaustive visual inventory of the city's artifacts. During the construction of St. Peter's, the Pope sought to reuse ancient masonry, while simultaneously documenting all ancient inscriptions and preserving sculptures that had been previously used. Now, according to the notebook of Marino Sanuto the Younger, in 1519, Raphael had actually suggested moving an obelisk from the mausoleum of Augustus to St. Peter's Square, but of course he would need 90,000 ducats to do it. According to Marcantonio Michiel, intellectuals were discouraged by Raphael's untimely death. Oh, sorry, spoiler alert, he dies at the end, because the artist was unable to finish painting the breathtakingly beautiful scene of ancient Rome. Unfortunately, it seems that Raphael's ambition to make an archaeological map of classical Rome never really came to fruition. What a shame. Well, at least we do have 4 archaeological drawings that have been preserved, but, well, they're not as good as what we could have had. You can't always get what you want, can't you? Well, of course, Raphael spent most of his time working on projects directly for the Vatican, but he also painted many portraits, including those of his principal patrons, that is, Pope Julius II and Leo X, the former of which is considered a masterpiece, and yeah, it's pretty good. A few more portraits showed him with people he knew, like Castiglione or people in the close circle of the Pope. Pope Pius IX sent 2 artworks to King Francis I of France as a diplomatic gift, and many other kings from many other lands spoke quite highly of Raphael's works. Now, an opulent banker and papal treasurer named Agostino Chigi had the Triumph of Galatia and other ornamental frescoes painted for his Villa Farnesina, mosaics made for the burial chapel at Santa Maria de Popolo, and a chapel in the church of Santa Maria della Paz. With his workshop handling the work in both residences, Raphael also designed some decorations for Villa Madama. Now, we also address the Raphael cartoons, which is a set of 10 drawings which are now housed in the Victoria and Albert Museum, represent scenes from the lives of Saints Paul and Peter, who created for tapestries of the Sistine Chapel, and they were some of his most important papal commissions. Several of these drawings still exist. They were sent to Pierre van Eelst's workshop in Brussels to be wove. Since the series was probably finished in 1520, Raphael may have seen it before he died. In addition, he built and painted the Loggie at the Vatican, a small gallery with Roman-style architecture that opens to a courtyard on one side. It's really pretty. Among his many illustrious altarpieces are the Sistine Madonna and the Ecstasy of St. Cecilia. His last work, a monumental Transfiguration, was finished shortly before he passed away. It, along with Il Spasimo, is kind of this testament, like a crescendo of his career. It shows how his art has evolved in later years when he leaned more towards proto-Baroque than these old Mannerist styles. Ain't nothing wrong with the old styles, just saying. Now, many of his works, like the Madonna of the Pinks, are on wooden supports. However, he was also rather known for using canvas, as seen in the Sistine Madonna, and drying oils such as walnut and linseed to create his works, incorporating practically all modern pigments into his lavish palette were ochres, vermilion, lead tin yellow, madder lake and verdigris, along with many more. But he also used this rare Brazil wood lake, this metallic powdered gold, and the less well-known metallic powdered bismuth in a number of compositions, including the Anside Madonna. According to Vasari, Raphael eventually set up a workshop with 50 students, some of whom actually went on to become famous painters themselves. I mean, they better. If you had a teacher like Raphael, you better become a famous painter. Imagine you send your kid to a school and that is the teacher. You pay out all the money and by the end of it he shrugs his shoulders and says, I'm going to go play the violin instead. Good Lord. Well, of course, this workshop was well above the norm. I'm sure we can all agree with that. Now, they included apprentices, journeymen, and famous masters from all over Italy, who were probably working as kind of like subcontractors for their own teams. Of course, they were all working on their own commissions under the guidance of the masters. And of course, because of that, the artworks themselves are often difficult to assign to a particular artist. And we have very little information about the workshop's internal working structures beyond that. Now, Gianfrancesco Penni, a seasoned master from Florence, and Giulio Romano, a young follower from Rome, who was about 21 at the time of Raphael's death, were the main characters in this workshop. Now, after Raphael passed away, they continued the workshop to some extent and inherited many of his drawings and other possessions. After Raphael died, Penni became Giulio's subordinate partner for a large chunk of his later career, and as a result, Penni never really achieved a personal fame equal to Giulio's. Both the renowned master, Perino del Vaga, and supposedly elevated worker, Polidoro de Caravaggio, became famous painters in their own right. De Vaga had previously been employed as a construction site laborer. Similar to Penni, Polidoro's associate, Maturino di Firenze, has subsequently been more famous than him. Giovanni da Udine was a more independent and responsible for the grotesques and ornamental stucco that encircled the main frescoes. Well, after that, many of the artists were scattered. Some died in 1527 during that terrible sack of Rome. God knows how much of the artwork was destroyed in that too. Of course, this made them all scatter around in panic and go to different parts of Europe, which helped Raphael's style spread across Italy and beyond in all different forms. So I suppose there's a silver lining to that cloud. Of course, Raphael was one of the most exceptional draftsmen in Western art history, and he utilized these extensive drawings to devise his compositions. A near contemporary noted that while initiating a composition, he would spread numerous stock drawings on the floor and commence drawing rapidly, almost madly, appropriating figures from various sources. More than 40 of his sketches remain for the Disputa in the stanza. It is likely that more have existed initially. A total of almost 400 pages are preserved. He employed various sketches to enhance his poses and compositions, seemingly more extensively than most other artists, as evidenced by the multitude of surviving variants. Of course, most Raphael drawings exhibit this considerable precision. Even preliminary sketches, including bare outlines of figures, are meticulously rendered, while subsequent working drawings frequently possess a significant level of refinement, incorporating shading and occasionally highlights in white. Although they lack the freedom and vitality shown in certain sketches by Michelangelo and Leonardo, they are consistently artistically pleasing. Well, at least to me they are. Well, he was among the final artists to extensively employ the metal point, a sharp-tipped piece of silver or another metal, although he also excelled in the more versatile medium of red or black chalk. In his latter years, he was among the initial artists to employ female models for preparatory sketches, but male students, or garzoni, were typically utilized for studies of both genders. Now, Raphael did not create prints independently, but collaborated with Marcantonio Raimondi to produce engravings based on Raphael's drawings, resulting in numerous renowned Italian prints of the century and significantly contributing to the emergence of reproductive printmaking. His passion was atypical for a prominent artist among his contemporaries, It was only shared by Titian, or Titian, maybe Titian, who had collaborated with Raimondi, with somewhat less success. Approximately 50 of these prints were produced. Some were reproductions of Raphael's paintings, while others were designs seemingly conceived by Raphael just for the printmaking. Raphael created preparatory drawings, many of which still exist for Raimondi to convert into engravings. Really good stuff for the early days of printing. Well, the most renowned original prints produced from the cooperation were Lucretia, the Judgment of Paris, and the Massacre of the Innocents, of which two nearly identical versions were engraved. The prints of the paintings, the Parnassus and the Galatea, were particularly renowned. Now, outside of Italy, reproducing engravings by Raimondi and others were the primary means through which Raphael's art was encountered until at least the 20th century. Baviero Carocci, referred to as Il Baviera by Vasari, was an aide whom Raphael obviously entrusted with his finances, and following Raphael's demise, Carocci gained custody of the majority of the copper plates and subsequently enjoyed a prosperous career by reprinting them and being the publisher. Well, from 1517 until his passing, Raphael resided at the Palazzo Caprini, situated at the intersection of Piazza Scorsa Cavalli and Via Alessandrina in the Borgo, in considerable opulence, of course, within a palace erected by Bramante. What? Did you think he was going to be like all the other painters and poets, dying in some filthy gutter somewhere? No, he actually had a decent retirement. I know, I'm as surprised as you are. Well, it appears that, I don't get too ahead of myself. He remained unmarried, but got engaged to Maria Bibbiena in 1514. That was the niece of the Cardinal Bibbiena. Now it appears that his friend, the Cardinal, had somewhat talked him into this engagement, and he had quite a lack of enthusiasm, evidenced by the fact that the marriage did not occur before her death in 1520. So a pretty long engagement of 6 years. Yeah, pushing it forward that much. I'm sure he wasn't too excited to get married. He is reputed to have engaged, of course, in numerous affairs, but a constant presence in his life in Rome was La Fornarina, Margherita Lutti, the daughter of a baker from Siena who resided at Via del Governo Vecchio. He was appointed groom of the chamber for the Pope around this time, conferring him courtly rank and, of course, a little bit of supplementary money, as well as being a designated knight of the Papal Order of the Golden Spur. Vasari also adds that he contemplated the aspiration of becoming a cardinal himself, possibly influenced by Leo, which might also explain that postponement of his marriage. Could be. Either way, Good Friday, April 6, 1520, the final day of the life of Raphael, and only his 37th birthday. Vasari states that Raphael was born on Good Friday, which in 1483 occurred on March 28th, and that the artist succumbed to weariness due to relentless romantic pursuits while engaged in the Loggia project. Subsequent historians and scientists have provided different explanations for his death, including a combination of infectious sickness and bloodletting. If you don't know what that is, there was an old belief that basically, if you were sick, you had the bad blood in your body, so you had to get the bad blood out. And there's only one way that happens. They got to cut you up. Yeah. Looking back on it all, it's I'm glad we've made advances in that. Well, during his severe illness, which persisted for 15 days, Raphael remained collected enough to confess his sins, receive the last rites, and arrange all of his affairs. He bequeathed adequate resources for his mistress's maintenance, assigned to his faithful servant Baviera, and allocated the majority of his studio possessions to Guido Romano and Penny. Now, at his best, Raphael was interred in the Pantheon, and he had a very opulent funeral. Of course, everybody showed up for that. There was a journal by Paris de Grasse that states that 4 cardinals, attired in purple, transported his body to the final resting place, the hand of which was kissed by the Pope himself. Now, if that doesn't get you into heaven, I don't know what will. There is an inscription on the marble sarcophagus of Raphael that says, "Here lies the illustrious Raphael, whom nature feared to be vanquished during his lifetime, and when he was dying, feared for her own demise." And with that, we come to the end of our biography of Raphael. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that Raphael was everything you thought he would be, or perhaps even a little bit more. Now I'd like to thank the top-tier patrons and supporters: Dark, Gary, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fazabo, Legitmus, Maverick, Susan, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Alexander, Nicholas, Daniel, JR, and Charlene. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. As always, I wish you all the best, and sleep well. Lots of love to you all. Good night.